Time for another watercolor. So today we're going to be talking about greens because it's spring and most of the blossoms are finishing up, and boy, there's a lot of green everywhere. As some of you know, I just got back from Ireland, and that means that there was a lot of green there as well. So it kind of brought it to the forefront in my mind as we come into the spring and summer. There's almost any landscape is going to have some green in it. So one thing that you're probably going to be considering is that, oh gosh, I need more greens in my palette. Well, not necessarily true. So let's, and my mouse isn't working very well. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay. So this is the reference picture that I have chosen. This was not a picture taken in Ireland. This was actually a picture that I took on my way back from picking up paintings in Grand Bend just this last weekend. So this one, I just loved the reflections and this little island here with that tree, that interesting tree in there. So, but oh my goodness, it is all green. Like there is so much green in this. So you'll notice my palette. Where I previously had greens, I've pretty much cleared them out, and they kind of crumbled up a lot, and some of them just kind of fell out of the palette, and I didn't bother replacing them. And so that's what I want to be talking about today, because the greens that you put into your painting really don't come from a tube. I mean, a pre-mixed color is what I'm referring to here. Now, just before I begin, I'm going to take my pipette and I'm going to soften up my paints, and I'll soften up this green just because I'll show you kind of the differences between having pre-mixed greens and mixing your own. So mixing your own is really the big fat secret to having variety in your landscape and making it interesting. When I teach beginners, one of the things that I see all the time is that, they grab a green and they put their brush in it and then it goes straight to their paper. So while my paints are softening up, I'm going to get into the drawing process here, which I've decided I'm going to show a little more often because a lot of you said to me that you found it very helpful to see actually my thought process in the drawing out process. So one thing I didn't remember to do it last week, but one thing I kind of like to do in my sketchbook, by the way, this is a travel sketchbook. It is Arches 300 gram, 15 by 25 centimeters, or 140-pound, 6-inch by 10-inch, and it comes in a little coil bound so you can wrap it right around. Yeah, this is the one we did last week, but this one I'm going to put it into a little bit of a frame. Now I'm not going to use a ruler or anything like that. I'm just going to eyeball a border just because it looks nice in the book, I think. It's totally your choice, whatever you feel like doing. Now this picture, it already is in this same kind of longer format, so that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're getting down to the drawing process. If your picture, because you could see in the thumbnail, I could only fit in about this much of it, and that's almost a square, right? If I tried to fit that into this, everything would have to get stretched out. So I'm trying to make sure that the format of my book or my page that I'm going to do is very similar to my actual reference. Either that or I remove some of my reference. So I'm seeing this island pretty close to the middle of my page. So I'm going to put a little dot there just so I can remember. I'm going to put a little lower. And So I know my island's going to be approximately there. The shoreline, the far shoreline here starts about here. The top of the trees lands here, and that's pretty close to being thirds. So I know that my trees will start up around here somewhere, and I'm just putting a little mark. This angle here, this comes across, and I'm marking where it is on my borders so that I can see sort of that angle that I want to use. And I'm just going to put a little dot there, and approximately here. All right, so this land here, I can come in and put that in first. Then I need my island. So I've already determined that this is where my island needs to be. And it kind of comes close and curves up a bit. I guess this comes up a little higher because it hides the rest of the island there. And so I do everything a little bit lightly for starters, because I know that if I do it too dark, I'm kind of stuck with those lines. They're pretty hard to get rid of. All right, so this shoreline comes down, something like that. All right, and my trees now, I really don't want to do the tops of my trees really dark, because the tops of my trees will end up looking like a cardboard cutout, and I really don't want that. I think I might just suggest some of the trees here on this island, just the bit of the gnarly nature of them. Just so I have a reminder as I start to paint this, but I'm really not painting, I'm not drawing in every aspect of this. I just really want to get a general idea. And I'm not really concerned about making it identical. I really just want the flavor of this landscape. Not really trying to duplicate it. I'm sure it changes too over the years. So even if I revisit this particular place, it can change over the years because, you know, things grow and so on. Actually, this area, just yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, we've had a crazy week of weather, and they had tornado warnings in the London area, London, Ontario area. A little bit unusual in our region, but we've gone in the last week from frost warnings to heat warnings. So the temperature has fluctuated crazily. But back to my painting here, I'm going to start off with my sky here. So I want to mix up some blue for starters, and this one's going to be pretty straightforward. This looks pretty much like a cobalt blue to me. Now, one thing, the same thing goes for blues as it does for greens, and that is, if you take it straight out of the tube, it doesn't always look quite right. Now that's pretty close, but to me, I think it needs to be just ever so slightly more purple. So if I go, let me bring this over a little bit more. If I bring a little permanent rose, I'm going to set it off to the side because that's a strong color. I just want a little tiny speck of it. See, I didn't put much in there. See, I just altered that slightly just so it's not quite so vivid. And I think that that's going to be a better representation of what I want to have in my sky. So I need this really diluted because I want a lot of the white paper to come through here. It's darker here, gets lighter over here. So I'm going to start right over here, and I will I will come down to where I predict the skyline is, or the top of the trees is going to be, and then I'm going to fade it away. So, and I'm going to fade it away so that the blue doesn't affect all my greens that I want to put in here, because I want to mix the greens to kind of match what I have here. I don't want to have to paint green on top of blue, which is going to make my greens much more blue than I want. So I'm going to just come in here, big loaded brush here. I don't want to have too much, too skimpy of a application of color here. In looking at this picture online, it feels like my color is probably a little closer to that, but with the printout from my printer, it looks more blue here. So I'm trying to kind of compensate for the printer's kind of restrictions that it has. All right, so this is getting lighter as I go across, so I'm just dipping my brush in the water, and I'm just going to come down into this area here. So this, I can put a little more color in there because of course this is going to dry lighter. But this line here, I don't want this to dry before I start softening that. But you can see I'm fading away. I don't want a crisp cardboard cutout edge on that sky there. So let's come in here with just the suggestion of a few clouds. All right, so this comes down because the landscape comes down here. It's as it goes further away. But again, I want to soften this lower edge so that I don't have the issue of, you know, a hard edge and fighting with that as I'm trying to put my trees in. So while that's drying, I'm going to start preparing some greens because, well, of course, that's the whole topic today. So I'm going to set this aside for a second, and I'm going to pull out just a scrap piece here. Now, this is a scrap piece just for trying out ideas and testing colors and that sort of thing. And I think when you're landscape painting, greens is one, you'll hear this from a lot of artists, is that the greens are one of the most challenging things to mix. So let's first of all start off with value. Where we have the sun shining and the green is lighter, I need thinner color. So first let's mix a color. I'm going to take Aureolin yellow, which is a bright sort of lemony yellow. Now let's make this stronger color here. So that means less water. So I've got a yellow, and then I'm going to put in some cobalt. Okay, so that makes a basic green, very much like a sap green. If I want it more yellow, I can add more yellow, or I can add more blue. This is a cobalt I'm using. I put a little too much water in my pool there, in my well. I'm just going to drink a little of that out. So you can see I can make a variety of greens here. If I work on wet, so if I take a clean brush and I just put some water down here, and I take some green and I put that on there, this green, it's going to turn out much lighter than this green. So you can see as this dries, this one's going to be barely green. And this is one thing a lot of people forget, is that you have to compensate when you are working on wet paper how much lighter. Even if I add more green to this right now, it's still going to turn out lighter than this because the water that's on the paper that I added to the paper is diluting that color. So you've got to remember as you are working on wet, or if you're working on dry, that you have to compensate with the water on the paper as well. You have to consider that that's actually part of the formula, part of the mix. Now, that's giving me a light value, but what if I want a dark value? Well, obviously less water, more paint. I want the richness. Right, so less water. So you can see it's pretty much, it's the same mix, but I'm getting soft edges, I'm getting a light value, and now I'm getting a darker value. If I want to go darker still, I can start introducing other colors. So you'll hear this quite often. You can add the complement. So if I take some of this red here, I'm going to borrow from this permanent rose over here and mix that into my green. Let's get a little bit more of the green back. Okay, so but I put a little bit of red in there, and now you can see that I'm getting a darker but also duller green. Now if I add too much red, that's really going to get dull. I can also layer this. So if I were to take this color and let that dry and then add another layer, I would be able to make that even darker still. But a little less water in this mix, plus a bit of the complement. All right, so that's going to be a little bit better. Not so much. It's got red in it, but not so much. So you can see I've already got quite a variety. But you know what? It's still kind of all the same green. So how do we get the variety of greens that we want? And before I actually start talking about that, take a look at my picture for a second. What makes this an interesting photograph is the fact that the sun is illuminating some of the green and creating darker shadows. So you've got a wider value scale, you know, much like I'm doing here on my paper. You're getting that wide value scale. If you are working from a photograph and it's kind of overcast, you lose all your highlights, you lose all your shadows, and everything kind of gets sandwiched into this middle value, and it makes it really very difficult to distinguish the different greens, but mostly to distinguish the different values. So if you can take a photograph where there's enough light to create stronger contrast, you'll have an easier time of making a watercolor painting, and it's usually a little bit more interesting that way too. Do I leave the water in my wells when I finish the painting? Does it dilute the paint after several uses? No, the water keeps evaporating, so it doesn't dilute the colors that I have. But the reason I put all the water in my wells is to take the hardened paint, like, you know, it's hard like a rock, you know, like this little palette here. You know, these are dried up. I'm actually hitting the paint here, and you can hear it's as hard as a rock. If I wanted to get a rich color, I would have to scrub to try to reactivate that. And if I soften up all my paint so that it's creamy again, so that it's more like it comes right out of the paint tube, I can just dip into a color, right? I can just dip into a color and put a good rich puddle down there. I didn't have to work at it at all. So in order to to paint those rich darks, that is my solution, is to do that. And I do not put the lid on my palette. I let it dry out again and again, because I don't want to trap any of that wet moisture into an airtight environment where it could potentially create mold. So I don't put the lid on. I just let it dry out. I come down and I wet it again keep going. I couldn't tell you how many times I've wet my paints, but it's a lot. If as the water evaporates, sometimes you can also be evaporating some of the binder of the paint, so it'll evaporate with your water. So the solution to that is to have some gum arabic. So this is, you can buy gum arabic. This is the, when you open your tube sometimes and this separates from your paint and you'll see it looks kind of oily. It's not oily. It's actually the binder for watercolor. So there's nothing greasy about it. It just kind of looks like oil. And you'll see that squeeze out of your tube occasionally. But I'll just put a drop or two into, like I'll put in maybe for this much water, I don't know if you can see how much I've got in there, but for that much water, I would put in maybe 6 to 10 drops or something like that in this much water. And I would use my eyedropper and add that back into my paints to keep them from getting overly dried out, converting back to powder kind of thing. So I would put that in there to help keep the creaminess of my paint. But eventually what happens with all this water is it penetrates, it soaks right into the paints and gets them nice and gooey. So that was a long answer to a quick question, but there you go. All right, so now one of the things you'll see in my palette is I have several blues, several yellows, mainly two, a warm yellow, a cool yellow, a warm blue and a cool blue. And then over here on the other side, you'll see I have a warm red and a cool red. So when you have two of each of the primaries, that expands your mixability like infinitely. You could almost make any color conceivable if you have a warm and a cool of each color. Now, that's very simplified. Of course, you can't make neons and things like that. You do need specialized paints for certain things, but you can get a variety of greens. So when I did this mix here, I used cobalt and aureolin. So if I want a different green, I could pick maybe the same aureolin. And what if I mix that with cerulean blue instead? Well, that's going to give me definitely a different green. Now I'm mixing basically two colors here. You can certainly start adding in a third color if you want to, but just keep in mind, as soon as you add in a third color, like another primary color, you will start to dirty up the color a little bit. You've got to be very careful with mixing too many pigments altogether. If you have paints that have single pigment, like so you look on the tube and you'll see a list of pigments. There'll be PY or PB or PR or whatever. There'll be a whole bunch of pigments listed. And if it has a lot of different pigments in it, you might be mixing more than you know. But my advice is to take a scrap like this, experiment with your greens, see how many greens you can make. A lot of people will even make a chart, and they'll have sort of all their reds or all the blues down one side, all your yellows down another side, and then they might even have where they've mixed in other pigments, maybe a raw sienna, maybe a burnt sienna, or something of that nature. It'll give you all different greens. So let's take that same cerulean blue, and instead of mixing it with the aureolin, how about if I mix that with the gamboge? Or you can even probably see on my palette that that's already making yet a different green. So this is why I don't really need to have pre-mixed greens in my palette. It is definitely a beginner issue, I think. When I say beginner issue, I mean, if you're new to painting, that's what you feel that you need. I do have, they call these convenience colors, right? So in this little travel palette, because I know I am actually going to be using a lot of greens because I'm, if I'm traveling, I'm probably painting landscape. So here, this is one called sap green. So this is right out of the tube, and it is a mixture as well. This is sap green, and it looks different again. Then I have, now in order to make nice dark green shadows, I'm going to use one called Perylene green. And if you need a convenience color, these are good shortcuts. It kind of gets you to your base color. But even here, you can see that that's a nice good dark. But even here, if I did a whole painting and that was the only two greens I had, I'd have the most boring landscape ever. So I would still, even though I have a green, I would need to add something to it to make it more interesting, right? To make it feel like it's in the light or something like that. So no matter how you slice it, you're probably going to be using some of your primaries to mix into the greens that you buy in a tube anyway, or you can just learn to mix them from your primaries and save yourself the extra expense. But I have it in my travel palette just because I've got a small mix area here, and it's convenient. It's a convenience color. It comes already mixed. But I usually do end up having to add in some of these other colors to it. What are the drops I'm sometimes adding to water when the water... Oh, the drops is gum arabic. This is gum arabic. This is the binder in your watercolor. That's what turns it from powder into that creamy consistency that you squeeze out of the tube. There's other ingredients as well, maybe some glycerin or something like that, but generally your binder is gum arabic in watercolor. Okay, so now that we have a variety of greens, not just a variety of greens, but we've got different values of greens. So you can see this one washed right out because it was on water and it diluted the color even more. Even though I added sort of twice as much color there, it's still kind of lighter than this one. Then medium value and a dark value. So here's the magic right in here. Light value, medium value, dark value. That's the main ingredient that you need to have in your landscape. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat. I can't watch properly now as viewing on my phone while on a sun lounger in Crete. I can only just see the screen, so this is on my must-view list. Aw, poor you. Lounging in Crete. Oh, well. So, back to my reference here and my painting. Now, when I look at my painting, I'm going to do the landscape first, then I will do the water. Okay, so I'll do the dry land first. I see a tremendous variety of greens in here. I see kind of a golden green in the light. Hopefully you can see that too. A little bit more of a brighter green in the grassy areas. This green is different than this, which is slightly more olive. And then, of course, we have some of those dark values as well. Jean's asking if I were going to buy only 6 colors of good paint, what would they be? I would buy 2 reds, 2 blues, and 2 yellows. Now, there's a lot of good brands. I don't want to be a brand advocate here. Winsor Newton's great. Holbein's great. Daniel Smith is great. Now, one thing about Daniel Smith is that they kind of capitalize on things like granulation and where the colors kind of separate, because that's a style of painting, right? I don't use those because I do a lot of things like glass and portraits and things, so I don't want any granulation in those. But for many landscape painters, they love it. So Daniel Smith's good. Da Vinci is what I'm using. Gosh, I'm going blank here. I can't think of all the brand names, but if you have a favorite, why don't you just list it? You know, everybody who's watching, you can list it in the chat and tell me what your brand is that you like. What I do look for in my colors is transparency, so that I can create the luminosity. So look on the color charts and see if it's a transparent color or if it's an opaque color. I tend to steer away from the opaque colors. I feel that the opaque colors kind of take the glow out of my painting, so I stay away from the opaque ones for that reason. But you know, to each their own. And opaques do have their own usefulness. They're great for adding on little details at the end, a little bit more like a gouache. But they're not very good for glazing, and I do work in a lot of layers. So glazing means layering up your painting with other colors or more of the same color. So since I like to do that, I try not to use opaque color, because I like to build up my colors a little more slowly and to maintain the whiteness of the paper to come through and brighten my colors. So I do find opaque colors a little bit duller. Anyway, so looking at all the varieties here, I see even a different green here, more of a mid-value green, but definitely the grassy areas here are a cleaner, brighter green, maybe more with the cerulean mixture in there. More yellow, I think. But one thing I will do, especially when I'm mixing greens, is I'm going to test it out before I put it on my paper. Sometimes it's just too bright, like it's almost like unnatural. And that's one thing I find about things like Viridian and that sort of thing, is that they can be an unnatural looking green. You won't find anything in nature that actually is that color. Oh yes, I'd forgotten about that. Thank you, Moscow Cowboy. Payne's Gray and Quinn Gold makes gorgeous greens. Yes. If you're looking for some darks, Payne's Gray has a lot of blue in it. So when you're considering blues to mix, this is cerulean, this one's cobalt, this one's French ultramarine, and then I've got you don't need all of these blues, by the way. I just happen to have them. This one is Indanthrene blue. This one is Payne's Gray. So, you can see these all look the same. So you do need to label. These labels have all fallen down, but you can see I do label all of my paints. When I put the lid on, these all flop down. Plus they get covered in paint, so I have to replace them every once in a while. But everything is labeled. And but I find Payne's Gray mixed with pretty much any green will darken it, dull it, make a great shadow color. So there it is with some Payne's Gray added in. It makes a nice good dark. You can add it just that and yellow, and it gives you a whole variety. So I hope I'm giving you some ideas about the number of options you have, even with a limited palette. So far I've used 2 different blues, 2 different yellows. Remember your primaries. And I haven't used a warm red yet. I've only used the permanent rose here. And if you're looking for a dark, add some Payne's Gray into it. And there you go. So let's get into this. So I've got my little test sheet. When I want to test something, I will often... Sorry, I'm fumbling around here, knocking everything. But as I'm testing something, I will usually test it on the edge. If I test it in the middle and I'm trying to compare it to the picture, I can't really bring this right up to the area on my photograph. So my eye has to jump. So just so my eye doesn't have to jump, I'm going to try this, where I'm just painting it on the edge. All right, so I'm trying to see if that's a good match. And you can see, even though it's a very, very bright green, I've got it too neon looking, right? So that was cerulean and aureolin. And I think I need to dull it a little bit. So I'm going to try some gamboge and cerulean. That was a lot of cerulean. Let's try adding some more gamboge into it. And let's try this. Okay, so I've got a little too much blue in it. Let's try some more yellow, more gamboge. Brighten up that green. But you can see this mix is different than that one because I used a different yellow. And I think that one is the ticket. I think that one's got me a lot closer to where I want to be. So don't just look at your palette and go, oh, that looks pretty good. Test it out. Compare it to your reference. If you're painting outdoors, hold it up. And sticking my thumb in wet paint here. Hold it up. It does make it tricky because as you hold it up, you can see, shading can affect the color. But you're also comparing it to a palette which, might be vertical, somewhat vertical. But do your best to try it out, hold it in the same kind of light, and take a look at your reference and compare it that way. So I'm going to come in with some of my landscape. Because there's a dark kind of separation here, I can pretty much just put those colors into those places. I don't really need to worry too much about blending everything here, but I do want to mix some of my more golden green, and I bet I have something close here. That was my cobalt aureolin with a touch of the alizarin crimson. Now, I don't know if that's going to be a good mix, so let's try this one out. Oh, definitely too blue. That's not the right green. So I need to have more aureolin in it because it's in the sunshine. You find that whenever you get greens in the sunshine, you are going to get a much more yellowy green. The sun will always produce a more yellowy green. All right, so this, it's getting closer, but it's got to be a lot more golden. So this yellow isn't that golden. So how can I make it golden? How about if I add in some raw sienna? That'll golden it up. Much, much closer. So I've got those are my mixes. You can write a formula beside it if you want to. So this one, and now I'm getting really scientific here, but mainly just so that you can learn about how to mix your colors. So this one was gamboge and cerulean blue. Right? That's what we had here. This one was aureolin and cobalt and raw sienna. So I'm making little notes here, what my mixes are. I put a check mark to show that, you know, I tested them all. This is the right one. You can make a note on your little scrap if you want that this is for the grass. And this is for the far trees. And while we're talking about the far trees, the colors in the distance are going to be duller than what's in the foreground. We can exaggerate that a little bit more. You know, if we want to create the feeling of more distance, we can reduce the contrast to create the feeling of distance. Sometimes you get so much green, so much going on that it makes it hard to see your main subject. So if the distant trees, because this is what my camera did, is it took a picture of everything in focus. The distant trees have as much focus as the foreground trees, has as much focus as the grasses in the foreground. So if I want this island to be the star of the show, which obviously I do, I can sort of melt all of this greenery together. Now, that melting it together doesn't mean making it all the same green. It just means reducing some of the contrast and the textures and things like that. So I'm going to take my, let's see, what have I got on my brush here? This was my grassy color. I think that was my grassy color. So that was gamboge and cerulean blue. There we go. But it needs a lot more gamboge. I think that was my combination. I apologize if I'm getting you mixed up here. My memory isn't what it used to be, so I think I'm pretty close here. So I'm going to come in here and there's some rocks and stuff on the shore, so I don't want to paint those green. I'm going to kind of avoid that, but I'm going to come in here with some greens. Now you'll notice I didn't even draw all of the trees and things in here. I'm just basically painting directly onto my paper. Now this is getting a little lighter as it goes off in the distance, so I'm going to just rinse my brush here, and I'm going to come through some of the grasses on the island as well. And definitely a whole big section right here. Now, I'm always one for advocating a transition when there's a large area like this foreground grass. So rather than just have the whole thing all painted the same, I'm going to borrow some of this dark here and start getting a little darker as I come forward. Sort of mix on the fly even and get a little more interest and variety in this foreground section. Now, I'm not worried about the little clumps. I'm not worried about blades of grass or anything like that. I'm just basically blocking in where my colors are going to need to be. I'm going to borrow this darker green here, which is going to go on the island. There's some soil or dead grass or something of that nature, sorry, right at the bottom of the island. So I'm leaving a spot where the soil is going to be, because the soil is a different color, different temperature. So when I say temperature, grass is cool, right? You step in grass, it's cool. So it's a cool color. And then the earthy colors like mud and such are going to be a lot warmer. All right, so I've got, a little bit for my island there. And I have my mixture here for these trees up top. And I don't see a lot of the laciness at the top. Now, when I say laciness, I'm talking about the holes in the trees where you can see the sky through. I don't see a lot of that in the background, but I do see a little bit, right? So that's why I needed to bring my sky down a little bit further than I actually want to put my trees. But I'm going to come in here and put this, and you can see already my paper's starting to get a variety of different greens. So I'm using the side of my brush because the side of my brush will scrape over the texture of the paper and give me those little pinholes in my distance there. Now I'm going to add a little bit of permanent rose just to change up this color a little bit. In here I see a little bit more warmth, so I'm going to change up this a little. And again, I'm just painting with the side of my brush to get a little bit more texture into this. I like that little edge quality there. And then I need more of that sort of pale, lighter green, aureolin, cobalt blue. Too much cobalt, lots more yellow needed. And just maybe a touch of red, hardly any. You can see I'm barely picking up anything. I'm adding it in very sparingly. And this is very transparent. And it's going to push back a little bit at that other wet area here and create a blossom. And guess what? That can be a really good thing, in fact, to create a blossom of something in the foreground. Now, I know some of you find blossoms quite distressing, but you can make them work in your painting to your advantage. So in this case, it's going to work quite well, I think, for creating that effect that I'm looking for. Now, I will come in with some negative painting as well. So what I mean by negative painting is some of these darks, I have to bring the shadows in, start forming some of the trees and such. But I'm going to take some dark. I'm going to take actually some yellow. And how about some Payne's Gray? Mix that in. I just used a tiny bit, but that's giving me a nice darker green. Didn't add too much. If you add too much Payne's Gray into your greens, it really does make them, it can make them too dull. Four Brush Miles is asking, good morning, Shelley. When you paint your large works, do I mix in a larger pan, or do you still use this palette we see in demos? I do use this palette, and I am often mixing and mixing and mixing. Like I will usually make my formula, and I like variety in my washes. I like variety within my painting. So I will just keep remixing and adjusting. I don't make one. I find that if you make one huge puddle, sometimes what can happen is that you will get a, it'll just be too much of the same, right? It'll just be too monochromatic and boring. So I want to make sure that I am not, I don't want to be boring. So I'm making sure that I have always have a little bit of variety going on. All right, so I think I'm going to erase that pencil line. I've dipped down a little bit further than I need to, but yeah, no, I don't mix a huge painting. I just started a full sheet watercolor, and yeah, I don't think I'd be able to mix. I would have to have a gigantic palette, I think. But I'm just putting a little bit darker green in through here. I'm going to dabble in a little bit here too. I love, when it comes to foliage, I love painting with the side of my brush. Now this is a squirrel hair brush. It gives me a really soft, like I use a light touch with my hand as well as the brush, and it gives me a really nice line quality, or a stroke quality, shall we say, you know, where it gives me those broken lines. It just looks a lot more natural in my opinion. So I really like that. Now we have some darker trees in the background, and these darker trees actually make some of the things in the foreground stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to make it a little more blue than what I see. Now why would I do that? I'm doing that because it's distant. If I make it more blue, it will look further away. Doesn't need to be dark. It just needs to be more blue. And I made it a little bit dark there, but I think it's going to be okay. Now there's a tree back there with a few little, just need my brush almost dry just to get just a few wisps of that tree. Now I may layer this up, but just so you can see, look how many different greens I've created already, just in the first sort of block-in stage. So from here I can start building up and really start to make things interesting, because I don't have a lot of dark values in here yet. I've got some other colors to add in, that sort of thing. I think I'll take a little bit of, I'm going to use some raw sienna. I want to get I don't know if it's rock or soil. I suspect it's a combination of, I think it's soil. It looks a little dry, but it's soil along here. I don't think it's rock in this area. This was, where was this? See if I can tell you. I think this was in, okay, so this picture was taken in Wellesley, and I took it on Sunday. So there you go. If you want to look up where Wellesley is in Ontario, you'll be able to go and take your own picture. I did have to pull over to the side of the road to take the picture, but that got me closer to the water to get a little bit more reflection and things, so as well. But definitely don't don't take your pictures while driving. So let me see here. I've got my soil now. I'm taking a little bit of the permanent rose, adding it into my raw sienna. But I still think that's going to be a bit bright. So I'm going to take a little tiny bit of cobalt blue as well. So it's taking that from being so golden to being a little bit more cooled down, a little bit duller. But if I'm not sure, let's just test it out. Now, testing out's a great way also to see whether or not the value is correct, and the value is so important. So you need to have a lighter value where lots of the white paper is showing through in order to get this looking correct. So I think I can even dilute that a little bit more. One thing that I will do in my landscapes quite often is I will sort of exaggerate my lights and darks, just because I know that the paint dries lighter and you think things are dark, and then they're not really as dark as what you expect in the end. And if you don't create that that wider value range, when you step back from your painting, you are not going to see the shapes very well. So that's why I say take your reference picture in the sunshine. You'll have a much easier time of painting it and making it feel correct. So I'm not going to paint any of my reflections until I get my trees and so on established. But I'm going to dry this, and then I'm going to talk about creating some of these negative shapes, because this is where people sort of have trouble wrapping their heads around it. And the negative shapes means if I want this tree to stand out, I need to make this tree a little darker by comparison, a different value, not just a different color, but a different value as well. If it's the same value, you can see it all kind of melts together. Just take my dry. I'm just going to make sure this area is dry before I do that. Just going to grab something here. I'm going to take one of my clips and clip down my paper, because you can see as it starts to dry, the paper starts to curl. And I've dropped my dryer for the second time. I hope I don't break it. Okay. There we go. So I'm going to take and clamp down my page. The one thing about a travel book is I don't have the luxury of stretching my watercolor paper, so it starts to move around a little bit and shrink as I'm painting. So that'll hold it a little bit. Hopefully this doesn't get in my way, but at this time my water's getting very green, but so far I haven't even used a green out of a tube. So negative painting. All right, so I know that I need a darker, duller color for some of these shadows. So I'm going to take some of this gold. I'm going to mix some. Oh, that's a little too dull. So I'm put a little Payne's gray in it, and it's not yellowy enough to turn it into green. It's looking more brown. So I do need to put some more yellow into it to make it actually look green. So there we go. That's getting there. All right, so I'm blotting my brush. Let me see if I can get this to where you can see where I'm blotting. All right, so as I blot my brush, and I'm going to come in and start creating some of my shadow. Again, I'm using the side of my brush so I can get that nice edge quality on this bush in front. Then I rinse my brush and fade that out. Now, you may end up having to dry in between some of these if your trees are really close together and so on. I am not counting all of my trees. I'm not making it identical to the reference picture, but I can drop in a little more color into a few places because that's just going to make it interesting. And you'll see I'm not including every tree either. I'm definitely trying to create my own painting out of this. This painting with the side of your brush, it's something that you have to practice at. But let me just say that I'm trying to only catch a few of the brush hairs on the paper. I'm not trying to flop down a sopping wet brush and then mop it across, because that just fills in and, basically destroys the whole effect. So I definitely need more dark green. I'm going to come over here to this one, get some more dark green in here. Pop in a few more darks in a few places, and those will melt into where it's already wet, but I can continue. Let's just mix all of this green together and put some panes into it, and that's going to give me a darker color. Now I'm not jumping like a crazy number of values. So in other words, I'm not jumping right into a dark. Remember, you need to have some mid values as you're going along. You do need to have that. Okay, there's a couple questions. I heard that with reflections, light should reflect dark, and dark objects should be light, but it doesn't appear that way to me. Is that a rule? Well, if you're working from photographs, your shadows are going to appear darker in your photos. It's just the way the camera works. And so your shadows, it's very hard to compensate for that. The painting that I'm working on, this full sheet watercolor, I actually did a light version. So let me just explain this with my phone for just quickly. If I'm taking a picture of something, okay, I'll just take a picture of my jar of brushes that are sitting on my table here. Okay, so I took a picture of, and you can see it's got everything in focus and everything like that. So, but when I'm taking a picture, if I touch the red area, okay, but if I'm in the photo mode, if I touch the red area, it will expose for that. If I touch the dark area, and this is the important thing, so I'm going to take another picture, and when I take the picture, I'm going to touch some of these dark brushes here, and we'll see if there's any difference in the photo. Now, there's not that much of a change here, but we'll see. All right, so I'll take the same picture, and I'm going to touch my screen right on that dark spot. You can also, okay, as I'm taking a picture, a little box will appear. If you slide your finger up or down, can you see that little slider that starts to lighten or darken? And then you can take your picture, and that's the exposure you've chosen. So if you take two shots, a normal one, and then one where it lightens up the shadows, you'll see that you can see more in the shadows. You'll have two references to work from. So if I take a picture of this, and I touch it there and slide it up. All right, so let's just take a look at those two pictures side by side. This, a lot gets lost in the shadows, and I lightened it. You can really tell, like in areas like here where there's a dark shadow, and here you can see what's in those shadows. So that's something you can do on your phone, and the camera will automatically darken shadows. Like when I'm just looking, across the table at this, I can see everything just fine. Your eyes can detect what's in the shadows. Your eyes kind of compensate for it, but then your camera will just make everything look too dark. So yes, that's why when you're looking at a reference, the shadows look extra dark. It all depends on what your eyes are adjusted to. So if they're adjusted to a lot of light, it will darken your shadows. That's why you'll see people who are painting, they don't wear hats just to keep the sun off their face. They do it to shade their eyes, so that they're not getting so much light from the sky hitting their eyeballs that it is making the shadows too dark to see. You know, when you see somebody sitting in front of a window, they look like a silhouette because your eyes want to adjust for the bright light. You know, your pupils dilate, or they shrink, and then you can't see the person very well. So in that case, like if you took a picture of somebody sitting in front of a window, you'd have to use that slider in order to force the camera to expose for the shadows. Anyway, long answer again to a short question, but hopefully that covers it. When would one use a sponge to paint? I think I would use a sponge if I was working really large. I don't think I'd have enough control in a little book like this. Just keep in mind, if you're using a sponge for your texture, you need a huge puddles because the sponge is extremely absorbent and will soak up a lot of that color. And so you will go through a lot of paint in order to do sponge painting. But yeah, if I was working larger, it's a great way to get some texture because the side of your brush, you'd be at it forever. Would I please show you your larger framed landscape paintings? Okay, maybe some other day. I don't have them all at my disposal, but I could find something. Do I love to teach, Shelley, because you are so good? Oh yes, I love teaching. Absolutely. I think I love teaching as much as I love painting itself. I love both processes. And when I have a class and somebody's light bulb goes off and they go, "Oh, I did it." That is like the best feeling. That's as good as me doing it myself. When I have a success myself, it's just as rewarding to me. So, yeah, I absolutely love teaching. And I especially love teaching because I have to say, I didn't always have the best instructors in my art school. I had a fabulous high school art teacher, and she's long since retired and so on, but she's still cheerleading and rooting for me on my social media. I think it's just amazing. And I happened to bump into her last summer, and we pledged to get together, and we haven't done so yet, but I can hardly wait. She still has something that she got from me in high school. And that was a few years ago, just saying, like 50 years ago. So there you go. All right. So thank you for your work. I feel like a friend next to me. Oh, thank you. That's so nice. And I think I could have. Okay, yeah, I think I covered all the questions. I'm now mixing some more shadows to add in here. And you can see I'm still maintaining a lot of my highlight areas. This is the important thing. You saved the highlights. Don't lose them at this stage. Don't get overwhelmed with putting texture in highlights. It can really throw things off. All right, so again, side of my brush. Most of the shadow is going to end up closer to the base of the tree, which obviously makes sense. The sun's in the sky, so the shadows are going to be at the base. Need to rinse my brush and help kind of mingle that in. That was a big jump there that I made with value change. So every time I do another tree, I kind of blend it in with a blotted brush. Right, so you can see how I'm separating trees as I go back, but I'm not really getting overly bogged down with specific details. There is this kind of strong dark, and so I'm not really into my darks yet, but I can kind of tuck a little bit of dark in here and there. And you can start to see that these are developing some form. All right, now I could keep going all the way across here, but remember my main tree is going to be here. So I don't want to confuse matters. I'm just going to taper this off here, and I'm not going to put any of the detail in those trees that are off in the distance. We don't need detail in those trees because they are off in the distance. So let's not get bogged down with that. I do find that this one needs a little texture, so I'm just going to take, not a dark, just a little bit more of a similar green, and just dry brush a bit in here and get some feeling of texture on that tree. Now, the other good news is if I've done all this and it's like, I really wanted a little more variety in here, you can glaze it on. And this is the beauty of using transparent color, right? So if I wanted to make this tree a little bit more golden, perhaps, I could take just the slightest bit of gamboge and glaze a little of that on top. Just kind of dry brush it on. Adds to the texture, gives me texture in the highlights, but it kind of brightens up that tree. If I need to make it a little bit more, say, orange in another area, let's say there was a little bit of a autumn color, just a little whisper I can put on there, and you can see I can create quite a few different greens by doing this. But this, using the side of your brush, it's a practice thing, okay? You will have to kind of use that tool as you go, learn it. I'm going to take a little bit of a darker green, blot my brush so it's not too wet, and I want to create some of the dark on the side of this edge here. And while I'm at it, I might as well come over to the island where there's some dark here. So I'm setting up more contrast here. You see that, right? And that's going to make things more interesting. Still not getting into blades of grass and tree branches and all of that sort of stuff just yet. I want to kind of stay away from as much of that type of thing for now as possible. But as I've got my dark green, I'm going to see what I'm doing to my brush. I'm kind of splaying it out like this. That's so that the bristles kind of do this. And that way I can just gently suggest some of the grasses in the foreground here. There's a kind of a little bush there that I didn't put in, but I can put a shadow for that, add that in. I don't like things to be too much the same, so I'm changing up my dark a little bit, putting a little that orangey red into it. And no, I'm not going to do every blade of grass. That's just silliness. This isn't an exercise in painting grass, so I'm just going to go with what I have. I am finding one thing about these trees. They're all kind of like in a straight line, and I'd like to have a little bit more of a variation in the height of the trees. So I'm going to come in here again with my brush blotted and just make some of this a little bit higher. Maybe put a tree back in here. I think it could be even a little darker. Feather touch, I find, is kind of the key ingredient here. Just a feather touch to give you the, the lightest possible. Keep it minimal. You can always add more to it, right? Keep it minimal, and then you've got somewhere to build. If you go in with a sledgehammer and really put in a lot of color there, that gets a little harder to recover from. So I'm kind of going easy. I want to go a little more golden green for some of the foliage here. And this is where dry brush is unrivaled, I think. Painting with the side of your brush. I often get people saying to me, oh, I need to know what brushes you're using. I need to know what paints you're using. And you know what? It's really not the brush so much as the touch with the brush that is the important thing. I have done this kind of painting with really awful brushes. And it's turned out fine only because I've managed to practice the techniques. So it isn't a magic brush. I know often people get a little bit too bogged down about the materials aspect of it, but it's really more just how much you're practicing your craft. If you're a hobby painter and you're only painting once in a while, you may not have built up enough brush miles to easily do these things. You may have to work at it a little bit, but work at it you must. I'm building in some shadow at the same time here, so I'm keeping most of my shading to the left of these, but I'm really trying not to fill it in. I need lots of sky peeking through there, and there's some stronger shadows here. See, my paints are so gooey. All I have to do is touch it and bring it over to my palette. I don't have to rub my paint at all. That's the beauty of using the bit of water in the beginning. Feather, feather, feather touch. Oddly, I find that there's a lot of instruction videos and just instructors in general who don't really talk about the pressure on the paper. But for somebody like me who went from painting with acrylic, where you have to basically wipe the paint off of the brush, I was trying to do that with watercolor, and I was in for a rude awakening because, of course, it doesn't always apply that way. The lighter the touch, the better condition the paper stays in, and often the better effect I get. Okay, so I need a break in this. I don't want to make it a solid. And I'm not doing any of the branches or anything like that. I'm always doing the foliage first. And the reason I need to do the foliage first is because the foliage is sometimes in front of branches. So unless you just sort of break it up and then deliberately put the foliage there, it's just much easier to put the branches peeking, like just where you can see some of the branches. It's easier to put it in amongst the foliage. All right, so you can see some of the lights peeking through there. That's why it's important to put those lights down first. Work light to dark in watercolor. Oh, I can hardly wait to get to the reflection on this. All right, so if I want to do some of the branches, now these branches are just very dark, but I'm not going to go just Payne's gray. I will go Payne's gray, and I'm going to mix that with maybe some burnt sienna because I want to warm it up. I don't want it kind of blue-black looking. I'd like to have something a little bit more earthy. So I'm mixing burnt sienna into it to make a warm black. I should say a warm dark. It's not really black. And I don't use a lot of black in my paintings. I think I have a tube of black, but not that I ever look for it or use it. Yes, Diane's saying, I respectfully disagree. I chased down your brush for fur and hair. It leveled up my technique. Yes, the brush can make a difference, but having the exact one is me. Like this is a natural hair brush. It's a squirrel hair brush. But having this exact brand and this exact size and so on, it really isn't a deal breaker. Okay, so this is where I have to keep interrupting my flow. Maybe I'll zoom in on this because it's kind of a smaller area. And so the foliage gets in front of the branch, so it gets interrupted until it gets up into this lacy part up in here, and then it starts to really taper off. And for this, I'm using a really long-haired brush. There's absolutely no information on it anymore. It is it's a rigger brush. And one of the secrets to doing a natural looking tree is keep stopping. Don't just do a straight, straight line or a wiggly, wormy line. Give it elbows in your branches. And what I mean by elbows is that, you just slightly change direction. But really look for breaks in the foliage. But continue the line so it does look natural. Just have to keep interrupting it. Don't interrupt it where there's sky, because then you'll have a brush, a branch floating in space kind of thing. Right, so you can see that the breaking up makes some of the foliage look like it's in front. And I love the character of these trees. They're like so interesting. Very gnarly. I guess that's another thing you could be looking for in your search for good reference material, and that is interesting shapes and trees and things like that, like a variety of trees. Sometimes when you go into particular area and it's like so much of the same kind of tree, it would be, I mean, it's kind of cool to be there, but it won't necessarily make the best painting. So inventing a little bit, and I do think I need a little bit more foliage here, which I can still add on, but and I'm going to take a little bit of this dark, mix it with some more green, and really darken up this one edge here. Maybe even some of the shadow in the, you know, from the tree here in the shade. So you see what I'm doing? I'm creating a lot of contrast where I want the focal point to be. I can go in and ease into a little bit more shading and so on in these areas. Of course I can come back and do a little bit of that. But I want to concentrate on this so that I don't overdo that before getting this part done. It's the darks that give you the feeling of sunshine. So let me just zoom out again so you can see the whole painting working together. And I think it is important to see a whole painting as you are developing it, because if you don't see the whole painting, you could overwork something. Don't want to get too detailed in other areas, but I am going to bring in a little bit more green in some of the foliage here. I left it a little bit sparse. And I think I'd like to see a little bit more gold in this main tree. It needs to be a different green than these ones. It needs to be more, it needs to come forward a little bit more. And so I'm going to put a little bit of that gamboge in here to really help this feel like it's being sort of kissed by the sun. There we go. So that has made that a lot more convincing, I think. Now I'm just going to erase this pencil line just because I want to move that shoreline just a little bit from what I had drawn. I'm going to just put a few darks in the soil areas here next to the water's edge. Okay, we've got the same sort of thing here. All right, so it's starting to feel more dimensional, and I'm just itching to get that water in, so I'm going to do it. Let's just go for it. So I'm going to need a little bit of that cobalt for the sky. There's just a little bit of sky reflection in here. Going to need some cobalt, and this color here, pardon me, is a little bit more saturated. The darks feel darker. Mainly that's because when you see water, you do see kind of the color of the water as well. So often the reflections are going to be a little bit darker. Okay, Brazen-Hearted, thank you. Everyone talks about keeping our paintings fresh and light, not to overwork. Do I have any more tips on this? Thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to touch any more of this. It might need more work, but I'm not going to try and complete any of this until I get the reflection in. In other words, I'm going to finish adding color to all areas of the painting before I make any decisions about building more and more and more. But you do need, it's a discipline. You do need to kind of stop. And if you don't have the discipline, maybe set a timer and say, I'm going to paint for an hour. And it's pretty hard to overwork a painting in an hour, although I'm sure some of you work really hard at doing that. But it is actually pretty hard to do it if you're trying to kind of work carefully like I am here. Like if you're typically a very fast painter, give yourself a shorter period of time. And don't revisit any areas until you have something of everything all over the paper. The minimum of all over the paper, right? So you've got minimum trees, minimum grass. I'm going to do the minimum of my water. And then I'm going to step back and ask myself, how much more does it actually need? When we are working close, because watercolor painters, let's face it, we're sitting really in close proximity to our watercolor. So we see what most people don't see. We're not looking, unlike people who paint on an easel, we're not stepping back enough. And that is very much problematic when you are working too close, because you see every little nuance and you see every little branch and so on. But what you really need to do is step away and then evaluate. So that would be my biggest tip, I think, is to just put the minimum everywhere, step back, and evaluate. Okay, so let's get into the water here. Actually, I think there was one more question before I do. Can I talk a little about how I show depth when everything is green? For example, I've found that sometimes bushes in the back are still in the light, but far away. Do I use yellow-green? Actually, more diluted color. Don't make it more yellow. Yellow colors will pop forward, which is why I put yellow on this tree here. It made it come forward. Often, like see these trees back here? I deliberately made them more blue than what they show in the picture. I did that on purpose to push them in the distance. So that was an important thing to remember there, is to usually things in the distance are a little bit more cool. The warm colors start to become more depleted the further things get away. And then so yellow colors will advance. And so I would just use a paler, not so yellowy green to push it back. As soon as you put yellow, it starts coming forward. So not a yellowy green. I would make it more bluish to put it in the distance. But part of it will be value as well, contrast and that sort of thing. Part of it. But the main thing is in the distance, keep things less value difference, right? So smaller value range, even just one color like I did here. And don't go with dark darks or extreme lights. It might be in the sunshine and so on, but I wouldn't make it extra light or extra yellowy, I guess, for the foreground. Oh, some of you are just getting back from Pace. Yes. Oh, you're so lucky. I would have enjoyed going to that. Maybe another year. Let things settle down a little bit and I might join again. Or I shouldn't say again, I've never actually been to Pace. And for those of you that don't know what Pace is, it is hosted by Eric Rhodes and Plein Air Magazine. I have videos actually with Plein Air Magazine and Streamline Publishing. So you can find out about all of those events at Streamline Publishing. And did I get all the questions? I'm not sure if I did or not. Talks about keeping our paintings fresh. No, I did that one. Okay. I think I got the questions. So let's move on to our reflection here. I started mixing up some of my cobalt blue for my reflection. Now there's barely any color there, so I'm going to just use the same combination, just a whisper of the permanent rose. I am going to need some sort of golden greens here, so I'm going to put some gamboge into some of my green here. I'm going to keep some darks. I need to have some darker greens as well. And I want to have all of these prepared because I really want to show these all melting together. Now there's an interesting, I guess it's shadow all across here, shadow on the water. So there's this funny little stripe across the water that looks illuminated. So we'll talk about that as I go along. I will need a little bit of that brown color just to reflect in the water here. So that was raw sienna and mixed with a little bit of blue and red and other colors. But I can just mix something up quick there with a bit of the brown I have. Okay, is there any other colors I need? Okay. I think I'm okay. Hope I am. Not sure I have quite enough of this gold and green, so I'm just going to mix a little bit more of this before I go on, because there's nothing worse than not having enough paint mixed up and finding that out in the middle of applying your color. So, and then a little bit more here. Just put a tiny bit of burnt sienna in that dark, just to make it a little bit more olive looking. And I think I'm good to go. So nice clean brush now. I'm going to wet the area first because I want all of this to run together. I don't mean completely run together, but I want to put it all in at the same time without any hard edges. Now the one thing I have to, and this is why I'm prepared just a little extra color there, is I know I need to put the color down a little stronger because I'm working on a wet surface. Remember when I was doing my test earlier and I put the green down and it just kind of disappeared? I don't want to have to do this twice. So back to your question earlier about, overworking things. Try to achieve the right value the first time. I guess that would be a big one as well. The more times you have to keep going back, the more trouble you're likely to get into with overworking. So, Hopefully I go dark enough. This is one area where I still slip up a lot, and you know, I always sort of fall back on the, well, I can add more later, and I usually do, but when I'm doing a demonstration, and I should be showing how to get the right value right off the bat. So I'm just doing the little bit of soil that is exposed here. That's being reflected in the water. I'm going to take my blue for my sky, and that's going to go in. Ooh, that's a little dull. Hang on, I probably didn't get all of the color out of my brush. Trying to come all the way up to the grass without actually going over the grass. If I get kind of that overlap and the line gets, I get kind of a dark line there, I'll show you how to take that out later. But it's obviously a spot there I forgot to dampen. And now we start coming in with some of these darker colors. First, the golden colors. And I'm going to add these in as vertical lines, because everything's going to be vertical from what, you know, from where it's being reflected. Need a bit of a blue-green here. That was one green I kind of missed. Put some of that in here too. Back to my yellowy green. All right, so I'm going to come across here, putting it in vertically. Let's get a little more gold going on here. Now you'll notice something funny happening here. The reason that you're not getting the reflection of the grass here is because it's sloped away from the water's edge, whereas this is kind of a straight drop off. This rock, this area here, it's this whole section here in the picture is pretty much a drop off to the water. This is grass that's sloping away from the water, so you're not going to see the same sort of reflection there. It's like a beach. You won't, if you're in the water, next time you're on vacation, look in the water, you get in the water and then look back at the shore. You're not going to see a reflection of the beach because it is too close to the, you know, it's angled away from the water. Now, just to reinforce some of these darks, straight below this one, right? I want to put it in the right place. Not too wet of a brush. If you put your brush in, like if your brush is too wet when you're doing this, what'll happen is you will get, it won't stay where you're putting it. It's just going to go in any direction it wants. So if you're looking for control on a wet surface, make sure your brush isn't too wet. So I'm blotting it so it'll stay where I'm putting it. All right, so I got to keep going. I don't have a lot of time here as the paper starts to dry. All right, so we've got some reflections of the trees here. So we've got a couple of strong tree trunks going on here. And this needs to be darker right here, below that area. Just all right. Well, I've definitely got a lot of different greens in here now. And as that dries, this is going to be lighter. It's a little darker right now. There's still one thing I want to do to it. But now I can see that I would like to just build up a few more mid values here. And again, it's got a little yellow in the green, but it's not too yellowy green. I don't want it to overpower this. And I'm painting more with the side of my brush than the tip of my brush. Making a little bit more of that orange mixture with my yellow and red, just to get a little bit of a different variation in there. And you can definitely see this dark line where I overlapped. Part of that is pencil line as well. So I will take an eraser to that in a few minutes. But let's dry this, and then we'll be able to kind of carry on a little bit more easily. Because at this point, it really just only needs a bit of little bit of detail and contrast in a few places. And I think we can kind of keep it as simple as this. I don't want to make it overly complicated. The actual photos like got a lot going on, but I think I could use a little more contrast here. So as I said, there was this kind of darker line that passes through, just mainly because there's a beam of sunlight coming across the water. So I need to take a little bit of dull green here. And just bring it across over top of everything else. Now I don't want to dull too much of the blue sky here. So I'm going to keep this more refined to the reflection area. And the way that I'll do that is to put it sort of on top of the green here. Rinse my brush and give it a good blot. Might need a new paper towel. I don't think my paper towel is very dry anymore. And then I'm just going to blot my brush and soften that one edge so that I get that one line that goes across. This one here. But that it doesn't dull my sky too much. So you can see that I'm getting kind of that differentiated light that is passing through the water there. It might even be just a current in the water or algae in the water. I'm not really sure what that is, but I do like it. So I think I'm going to take a little bit, because it looks a little darker in this lower corner here. So I'm going to take a little bit of the blue and bring that in there as well. And if I drag my brush across, it just gives a little motion in the water. I think I like that. All right, so I think pretty much the only thing I need to have done. Okay, first I need to, I got to put a bush in here that I nearly forgot. So I'm going to put this in here right now. And I do need a little bit more contrast in a few places. So I can bring my darks in here. Just bring a few, like be selective about it and make a few areas count. I'm just using, again, a light touch. But I just want to get a little bit more contrast happening. Bit in the reflections. And I want to separate this water's edge a little bit. It's a little bit darker right at the edge, so I'm just going to put that defining space there. Separate that with a little bit of contrast. And again, this is, you know, the question was asked earlier, how do you keep from overworking your painting? Take frequent stops, lean back or step away, and ask yourself, how much more does it need? If you're struggling to figure out what it needs, you might be done. In fact, it's probably a good signal to you to end it, like just to stop fussing with it. So I'm using this rigger brush, the end of the side of my rigger brush, but it's so floppy that it's a little hard to control. I think I do actually like my other brush. But I did want to say about this line here and how I would get rid of that, because it kind of looks like I outlined the shore, which is a bit strange. Just have to make sure everything's dry. I dropped my heat tool and it's smelling funny. I hope I didn't break it. Anyway, so first I'm going to try my eraser. I know part of the darkness is my pencil line, but that's not all of it. So most of that dark line is just overlap from my water when I put my water up against my grass. So what I will do, now you can take pretty much like a little round brush, or I'm going to use a flat brush here, and I'm just going to dampen and blot, and dampen and blot just the line itself. Keep blotting as you're doing this, because you know where there's an overlap, that means there's extra paint there. So you're softening it, and then if you pull it, if you're constantly blotting, you're pulling off the extra paint. So I can get rid of that weird dark edge as long as I, like, don't just wet the whole thing and then start blotting, because what you wet at the beginning is already dried. But keep blotting as you're dampening things, and you'll get rid of that dark line. Sorry, this is kind of sliding around on my table a little bit. And this works better with some colors than other colors. You know, if it's a color that lifts easily, you know, you're in good shape. If it's a staining color, it doesn't lift quite as easily, but it will still lift. So you're not out of luck. Yeah, I think I'm going to darken this just a tad more. Kind of like this kind of darker area here. And I think I need a little bit more separation back here. This to me isn't reflecting quite correctly. I've got I need a nice light color there, and I think I might have gone a little bit dark in the water, so I'm gonna lift a little bit of this. Brighten that up. That feels a little better. Okay. What does it need? Okay, you tell me. I'm thinking the island shadows could be a little darker. See, the more shadows, don't you find that the more shadows you put in, the more it feels like it's a bright sunny day? Can't dry brush very well with a flat brush. I shouldn't be doing that, but I'm going to just add in just one or two little touches, I think. Just the hint of some reflected detail there, and maybe a little line separating the shore from the soil. A little too dark. Let's pull that off right away. So nothing I'm adding at this time is going to be adding in any kind of washes. I'm done with washes. Can't add any washes in here at this stage, because doing so will definitely make a mess of what I've already got. I can add little bits of dark here and there. I can, add texture, things like that. But there's really very little that I can do at this stage that is going to be involving washes. The only, if I wanted to pump up the gold on this tree even more, it's just going to be a little light touch. It's not a big wash, not like my sky. You're not going to go in and say, oh, I wish my sky was darker, and try to do that now. You've already got all your details and foliage, and you'll muck it up. So you don't want to do that. Tiny bit more gold. It's feeling sunnier all the time, and I think I'll just I feel like this doesn't have any texture in this grass, so I'm just going to put a little hint of that in here. And I think I'm done this one. I think I'm just going to wrap this one up. Let's just take this off. That's a lot of greens. Hopefully it's not too boring. I've got a lot of lights, darks, warms, cools, transparent, more layers in some areas, that sort of thing. But I also kept it very simple. I didn't use any tricks like you throwing in salt or anything like that. Most of the texture that came into this was dry brush. So let me just check. I don't think there's any real burning questions at this point. What? Oh, wait a minute. Was that paper wet? Was that paper wet or just the brush when you started reflections? Missed that. Yes, I already wet the paper in order for this to look kind of diffused and melted into the, like all the colors melting together. But I had to compensate with stronger color because I wet the paper first. That's the important part to remember. When you work on a wet paper, you do have to use stronger color. Did I plan where I was going to put warms or cools before you started? Well, warms and cools for me are almost an automatic. Warms are in the sun. The sun warms everything up, so you can. That's easy to remember. Warms everything up. The shadows are cool, so they're going to have a little bit more blue. Now that's most of the time. That isn't every single scenario. You know, there's an exception to every rule. So sometimes in the middle of the day, when the sun is directly above, you will get cool highlights and warm shadows. So sometimes it will reverse midday, but I like the time of day when you get kind of the longer shadows and that sort of thing. And I think that that's an interesting time of day. So most of the time when I'm painting, it is warm in the highlights, cool in the shadows. Oh, what's the difference between a wash and glazing? That's a great question, actually. If I wanted to make I came back in to add more yellow to this, that's glazing. That's not a wash. I didn't use a big sopping wet brush. I didn't necessarily wet paper in order to put in a wash or anything like that. But if this sky is definitely a wash. It's a big solid color, or nearly uniform color. If I were to come in here and then try to blend that down into my trees, what do you think that's going to do to my trees? It's going to mess up the tops of all my trees. So I would not put in a wash where I'm putting in like a whole section of an area. But yeah, I can add little bits here and there, and that's glazing, where you're putting color on color. That's glazing. It doesn't necessarily, glazing can be a wash, don't get me wrong. Like if you had this foreground and decided, oh, it just needs more color, well sure, you could come in and you could put more color on that in that area. But I wouldn't do a whole wash over like all of this or anything like that. Because I've put details, I put darks in, and those start to smear, and that's when things go wrong, because when you get some of your heavier pigments on here, when I say heavier, I just mean you've built up more color and so on, then and then you wet it and you start doing this, that color starts going left and right, and it starts smearing into everything, and boy, oh boy, you're really going to end up with something overworked at that stage. So that's why I'm saying stay away from adding any washes at this point. But I hope you get the feeling of the lightness, the airiness, and most of that comes from using diluted color and transparent color, right? So the white, this white of the paper here, that's what's making this light, not white paint. If you've got the idea in your head that, if I put some white into my paint, it's going to make it lighter, it won't. It's just going to make it muddier. So white is a cool color. If you add it to something warm, it's going to really kind of make it more gray and not very nice. So keep that in mind. Don't use white paint if you can at all avoid it. And thank you so much, Suzette. And I think I spotted something earlier. Yes. And Val Summers, thank you so much. You're so generous. I really appreciate your support of my channel. That's wonderful. You guys are the reasons I come, right? It would be kind of silly sitting here talking to myself. Okay. Did I miss anything? Just Karen says, thank you. Thank you. And are the water ripples from the wind? They're probably from the motion in the water. It wasn't particularly windy the day that I went down. So it can be. these little ripples here in the water. You know, and for that I just kind of dry brushed the color over top to give the idea of some ripples. But mainly this stream was pretty calm. I actually got quite a few nice pictures of this stream. Another one where it's windy and that sort of thing. So I kind of liked it. This little spot. It was not the best place to be stopping, but it was a very, very quiet road. So unless a car or a truck was whizzing by, it was pretty peaceful in this spot. So anyway, I guess at this point I'm just going to come back and wish you a wonderful week. I hope we get to kind of a neutral temperature this coming week. My plan exactly for today was to get outside and paint plein air with you, but when I got up, it was looking pretty. Rain looked pretty imminent, and then the sun came out. So you can never predict it from one minute to another. But I'm really going to try next week to get out and maybe do some plein air with you. So have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you so much for your generosity, for subscribing, all of those good things, and I will see you.